Our first story starts in Tucson, Arizona, in May 2011.
When I think about that time, I think about spring. And just how busy it was and how beautiful she was. She was 11 and a half years old and just physically perfect, beautiful from head to toe. Slim, white blonde hair from being out in the sun, a little bit of freckles across her nose, bright blue eyes, paying attention to what her clothes looked like and her hair. Never stopped talking, talked a mile a minute. That was Addie at that, just, in the month before she got sick.
Journalist David Hoffman started reporting on the threat of superbugs for Frontline more than 4 years ago.
There's a warning from the CDC.
New and extremely dangerous
superbug.
Covering what government officials have called a nightmare.
It's a deadly nightmare bacteria.
The CDC has called it a nightmare.
A kind of dangerous bacteria that is increasingly resistant to the strongest antibiotics.
Morning.
Hi, I'm David Hoffman.
That's what brought us to Tucson, Arizona in 2013 to find out what happened to Addie Rarasich after she complained to her mother about a pain in her hip.
I thought, well, she's just finishing up softball. She had been to the track meet, it all kind of, it could have been an injury. I gave her some ibuprofen. As the night wore on, her pain got worse. She didn't sleep much that night. Woke me up a couple of times asking if she could take a hot bath or have another ibuprofen.
The next day, Tanya Rarasich, a nurse for 16 years, took Addie to a local hospital where they said she had symptoms of a virus. But over the next few days, the pain spread and the fever got worse.
I was afraid. At that point, I remember being very afraid. And so I packed a bag and we went to another hospital that had specialized in children's care. I remember thinking, she looks bad. This is bad. Something's really, really wrong. They put her on antibiotics. Her blood pressure was dropping. They, were making space in the ICU for her. The next morning, she needed oxygen via mask. They looked at part of her lungs and diagnosed her with pneumonia. I remember sitting there watching the sun come up and thinking, how did she get so sick? How did this happen so fast?
I met Addie in a hospital bed in the intensive care unit. She was lying there, breathing quickly. She was scared. She had little infected boils all over her body. What really looked most likely when I saw her was a staph bacteria causing septic shock. And Addie fit a pattern that I recognized with community-associated MRSA.
When you say community, this is what you mean, that a kid picks it up in a playground with a scrape to the knee, right?
Correct.
The spread of MRSA, a staph bacteria that causes infections resistant to many antibiotics, has long been a big problem inside hospitals. But over the last 2 decades, it's also been found outside, in the community.
In Addie's case, she was a skin picker. She, as do many kids, picked at her little scabs. And that was likely what introduced the staph infection.
But the staph was just the start of Addie's troubles.
She already had evidence of an early pneumonia, and it looked like she was about to get a lot sicker.
I asked him what were the odds of her making it, getting well.
What did he say?
He said 30%, but he had to think about it for a minute, and I knew he was lying to me. I knew. By the time your blood has bacteria in it, you're in real trouble.
The staph infection had so damaged her lungs, the doctors had no choice. To save her life, they put her on a lung bypass machine called ECMO.
I remember saying, ECMO? With a squeaky voice, like, no, really? You're not really talking about ECMO.
This was total life support.
It's got huge tubes that are put into an artery in a vein, and the patient's blood comes out of their body, runs through the machine, and the machine does what your lung does.
The tubes presented a whole new set of dangers,
Those tubes can harbor bacteria.
and one of the dilemmas of modern medicine. The interventions that can save you can also put you at serious risk.
Any patient we put on ECMO has a much higher risk of having additional infections. That's just the nature of the beast.
Is that what happened here?
Correct.
And she got a particularly nasty one. What was it called?
Stenotrophomonas.
Stenotrophomonas is an entirely different kind of bacteria from staph. Found in hospitals, it can live inside breathing tubes, and it's extremely difficult to treat.
The problem with Stenotrophomonas is, even at the outset, it's already a very resistant bacteria. There are only 4 or maybe 5 antibiotics normally that are able to treat that particular bacteria.
Addie was confronting the frightening new face of antibiotic resistance, a group of bacteria called gram-negatives.
So can you explain to me why these gram-negatives are so stubbornly nasty?
Gram-negative bacteria, it's a medical term, and it really references the armor that surrounds the gram-negative bacteria. That armor makes it very difficult for normal antibiotics to get into the bacteria and to kill it. So Stenotrophomonas is incredibly difficult to treat because it has that serious body armor surrounding it.
Are you guys gonna come out and go that way? Okay.
The ability of gram-negatives to aggressively fight off antibiotics was now playing out in Addie.
She was first put on one antibiotic that's good for Stenotrophomonas, and it worked for a while. And then guess what? The antibiotic doesn't work anymore. Let's give her a different one. Well, and then it would, work. Couple weeks, 3 weeks, and then the Stenotrophomonas would sort of like bloom back up, rear its ugly head, so to speak.
And you're doing great. You are.
Finally, one day, they said something I never thought I would hear. The Stenotrophomonas is pan-resistant. Pan meaning resistant to everything. Like a panorama.
Addie and her mother had entered the post-antibiotic era.
I had to go to her and say, I don't have options based on medical science. I've run out of options. I don't see a way out of this.
I remember a long weekend went by and they had asked me to sign the papers to let her go. And I did.